My name is Jefferson Goddard, and I'm the new curator here at the Salina Art Center. You've all given me a wonderful welcome in my 3 weeks that I've been here, and thrilled to bring you our new Lunch and Learn programming today, which we're so happy to be back in person, sitting together, enjoying. Thank you for joining us. To begin with just a few updates, our next reception is on the 25th with George Yerkovich, entitled Glossy, Bright, Colorful, and that will be from 5 to 8 p.m. in the South Gallery. There's still time to enroll in our summer classes online, and there's still scholarships available, by the way, as well. The closing reception for our current show, Dissonance in Resonance, is on July 23rd at 6 p.m. And our curator, the curator of our show, our guest curator, Terry Evans, will be here on the 23rd of July at 6 p.m. And then our next Lunch and Learn series is with an artist from our show, Dissonance in Resonance, Christy Seeley, and that'll be on July 21st. Now I'm pleased to introduce our June Lunch and Learn speaker, Marie D. Johnson. Today, Marie will offer us an in-depth look at how segregation affected African Americans in Salina during the Jim Crow era. Through firsthand accounts and historic documentation, Marie will share the effects of racial discrimination during this time. She'll also bring today's shared experience to light and discuss how this impacts our community today in Salina. A 2009 graduate of Bethany College, Marie is a historian, educator, and Army veteran. Marie has won critical acclaim for her writing. In 2016, she won first place from the Kansas Association of Historians, and third place from the Kansas Wesleyan University for her thesis, The Election of Robert C. Caldwell, Salina's first African-American mayor. Currently, Marie serves as an educator at USD 305, and as well her husband and her, Justin, are proud parents of Isabella. As an additional point of reference behind me, you'll notice the map here of Salina. This is part of Tanika Johnson, no relation, folded map project which examines shared experiences in Salina. We feel that Tanika's map here project offers a meaningful backdrop to Marie's impactful lecture today, and invite you to engage with it afterwards. Please help me in welcoming Marie D. Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. This is interesting, this map up here. The area that we're going to be talking about today is this area right here on North Street and North. This is where all the African Americans are basically segregated at. And it wasn't until I believe in the late 60s or 1970, Mayor Caldwell was the first African American to buy a home south of Crawford. So that's just a little bit of information. So this slide here is actually at the Salvation Army. And back in the day, people used to congregate, the African Americans would spend time there. They had a basketball court. Personal information, my grandmother actually worked there in the 80s and 90s. So we had an affiliation, but it was later on in years with the Salvation Army. So the Salvation Army was very important down on the north side of town. And so you'll see some of the Salvation Army. There's a captain there in the front sitting on the couch. And then you see some soldiers right there on the left and on the right. And they were stationed at Camp Phillips, which is way on the north side of town. And that was built up during World War II by President Roosevelt. And he built that up in a very short period of time. And there's an interesting story with that. That's where they kept the German prisoners at. And so there was this, it was like a bus station restaurant. I don't know if you guys remember that. Anybody here from Salina remembers that bus station and restaurant on the north side of town? Well, that's where they would take the German soldiers to eat. The Germans could sit down and eat, but the African Americans had to sit outside. And what happened is there was this little riot because one of the African American soldiers said he was not going to sit outside, and then he was beat up and kicked out, and then he went back to base, and a whole bunch of them came, and they pretty much tore up the north side of town. The only reason why I know about this is because there was a publication, the African Americans had their own like little newspaper, it's called The Word Is. And so that was in there, so I went to try to find it, look it up and stuff, and all I found was one sentence that said, riot, United States Army riot, Salina, Kansas. So when I'm bringing this up is there are all kinds of buried stories in our country that they're so significant. And I mean, just what happened in Tulsa, you know, 100 years later, and people are just now learning about it. And so there are stories here in Salina. I look at it as a gem that even African Americans don't know about what's here, and I'm still learning. So we'll go to the next slide. This is Colonel Phillips, hence Phillip Street. He's the one that founded Salina. He and a party of white pioneers established a permanent settlement along the Smoky Hill River. And he was an abolitionist, a journalist, and a lawyer. And he, in fact, was commissioned by the United States government to go to Leavenworth and investigate the African Americans not being able to vote there was violence with the freemen. So after they were allowed to vote, people would not allow them to vote. So he came down to investigate it, and then he returned, and then he came back to and started Salina. And then Carolyn Jackson was the first black pioneer in the early days. She came in 1861, 3 years after the town settlement, to work for Colonel Williams and his wife Margaret. So actually the first black person in Salina was a black woman. I don't have any pictures or anything like that, I'm sorry. Very difficult to find. Now this is a replica of a Salina home, or not a replica, it's actually a Salina home. 1862, before the railroad, the population of Salina was less than 50 people. The town began to grow in the early 1870s, becoming a third-class city with some 1,200 citizens and a small core of emancipated African Americans. So this is a home. Here is a hotel and store. And African Americans primarily that are descendants in Salina, they came from Kentucky primarily. And what happened is in Kentucky and other southern states, they would have railroad transportation trains, or what do you call wagon trains. And they would all come together and travel towards the north. And these people were trying to get to Nicodemus, which is a black settlement. If everybody knows the Nicodemus about the black settlement. So they were on their way, and this is one of the ads that was from Kansas City, and they charged $5 and to go to Kansas. And this is an example of the caravan. Or not an example, it is a caravan. I keep saying example, sorry. Now, this one is, I love, the families traveling together. They had to travel together because people were out to get them and they would hurt them. So they had to travel, so families, so like the ones that came here to Salina, you have like the Williams, you have some Parkers. Those families came to Salina together. One of the earliest families was the priest. Here's a picture of Flora, and she's about the second generation. One of the earliest families to settle in Salina, they came here in 1870 from Florence, Alabama. Sidney DePriest was a full-blooded Frenchman from Paris, and his wife was a mulatto daughter of Governor Patton of Alabama. So a lot of people don't like, you look at like Strom Thurmond, probably the most racist congressperson ever, and that says a lot. And he's got a black daughter, you know, so there are all kinds of that going around, especially down south. Anyway, she was in charge of the plantation, and she was given quite a bit of property. Now they were ran out of town because the KKK was after them. Because two of their 16 children threw rocks at a dog, after the dog came after them, and so they chased him out of town, and they ended up in Topeka, Kansas. So she's one of the descendants. That's Sidney's wife. This beautiful lady is Rosalind, Sidney's daughter, born 1930. They had some capital and skills and opened the first paint shop in Salina on Santa Fe Street. And they painted houses in Salina and surrounding towns. Now this is interesting. One of the grandsons, Oscar the priest, wanted to study law, so he moved to Chicago. Oscar became a lawyer and real estate dealer, and in 1928 was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, the first black to serve since Reconstruction. However, things weren't great. There was still segregation, and the blacks were segregated on the north end of town, which I showed you earlier. Things were fine as long as they didn't get out of line. And then we had our first lynching. And as far as I could find, it was the only lynching that we had. This is Dane Adams. It's from the word is again. That was, I didn't find this in a newspaper, Salina newspaper. And actually, when I was doing research, I had to find a lot of stuff from the Salina Journal, and it's not documented. You won't go to the library and find this information about African Americans in Salina. But anyway, I was asking one of the elders why the Salina Journal, you know, they did a really good job documenting what was going on, you know, in the black community. And she said, well, yeah, they were keeping their eyes on us. And I never thought about that, like, anywho. So Danes, he got out of line. He was known for cutting up people, fighting, and he happened to do that to a white boy, and he was arrested and taken to court, and the blacks felt that it was a fair trial and the sentence was fair. So once the news spread to the white community, there was a white mob of 75 that formed. And so Dane was on a train and headed to the state prison. 3 men boarded the train and uncoupled the engine from the rest of the cars and told the engineer to take the engine down the tracks. So they actually separated the engineer and made sure that Dane stayed here, pulled him off the train, and dragged him to 9th Street. So you got 9th, it's about 9th and North. And I don't know the exact location because I couldn't find the exact location. I just know that it was 9th and North. A rope was thrown over a telegraph pole directly in front of the station, and he was then hung by the neck with his hands handcuffed behind him. He hung there for a few days until some African Americans cut him down and buried him. And then the blacks were afraid to go to work or be seen for a few days because they did that, because they cut him down. This isn't the actual lynching, but this is an example of the lynching. And if you can see the faces of the people, it's like an enjoyment, like they're an outing, you know, like this Smoky Hill Festival. You know, it's like, yay, a lynching. So anyway, 4,081 lynchings took place in the 19th and 20th centuries. The first time an anti-lynching bill was voted on in Congress was 1918, and it was filibustered by the Senate. The U.S. Senate passed the Justice for Victims of Lynching Act in 2019 on a voice vote, and that was by Senator Kamala Harris, Senator Scott, and Senator Booker. But it didn't pass the House, and if you guys remember in 2019, the House was very conservative. So anywho, it came back up again in 2020, passed the House, went to the Senate, and one senator has held it up, and that's Rand Paul. He's held it up, and his reasoning is that it's too vast, and the punishment is too great. So that's his reasoning. But he voted for it the first time it went through, and it was held up by the House. So, and his reasoning, the only thing that changed was the name of the bill. They changed it to the Tillis bill. So during segregation, blacks weren't allowed into white restaurants. They sat in the back of movie theaters, and they attended a separate elementary school, and in high school, they sat in the back of the class. What they were allowed to do was they could come up on Santa Fe because Salina, I mean, we had Santa Fe, and that was like it. You know, there was no houses or businesses. But if they wanted some food, they could come get it, but they had to get it from the back. And they couldn't work amongst the whites. They couldn't work on Santa Fe. It was dangerous for them to even be seen on Santa Fe. So I have a picture here of the businesses. There was we had our own businesses. We had beautician shops, restaurants, clubs, dry cleaners. Everything you can think of was on the north side of town. And it's actually, when you go down North Street, North and Pacific, it's all in that area. It's like industrial now, like towards the right. I guess that's what, east? My directions are horrible. But anyway, but so was Vibrant. So some of the places they had was Jones Cafe, Cloud Williams, Parker's grocery store. They had a funeral home because whites wouldn't bury African Americans. A doctor's office, a plumber, cleaning, whatever you can think of their services, because they couldn't get services anywhere else. And also I want to add to that, during segregation, the African Americans couldn't sit with the whites in the movie theaters, so they sat on the top row. Now, the Stiefel Theater used to be Fox Theater, and I remember going there as a kid, and I know you do too, Aunt Debbie, and all the blacks sat on top, and I always kind of wondered why we always sat up there, not down there, because that's the way it was back then. All the blacks sat on top. So you can see how things kind of are kept the same. You know, I mean, there's like tradition. You know, years later, we're still sitting up there. And I know when I was growing up, and I'm old, but not that old, I didn't see like black bankers. I didn't see black police officers. In fact, Dillon's was the store where that was a good job to get a job at Dillon's. You got insurance and you got good pay. I never saw a black person working at Dillon's, you know. So it was weird being like a youngster and not seeing people that look like me. And so the first teacher that I had that was African American was in 7th grade, and that was Mrs. McDaniel. So if you're from Salina, you know Mrs. McDaniel. Anyway, that meant the world to me. She's a social studies teacher. So, and now this is a replica of the church dugout. That was in 1879 and 1882. So this is where people worshiped. And now, St. John's Missionary Baptist Church held its first service in 1879 with members, and it would look like that, in a dugout structure on North 2nd Street. They held their services there until 1882, and the founding members signed the first charter in 1883 and located to a storefront on Santa Fe and Ash. Founding members signed the charter when they registered with the Secretary of State with an X because most could not spell. The first church building was purchased from a white Baptist church in 1887, and they moved from West Ash to North 5th. Now this is, oh gosh darn it, I done did it again. Oh, it's not, okay. And this is quite interesting. When they were there, the International Harvester Company came to town and wanted that 5th Street location, and that was the railroad place. And so they personally guaranteed that they would find a new home for St. John's Church members, and they found a lot on 7th Street. And they would trade with the church, but there was an opposition that was led by Hattie Hunt, a wealthy black woman who lived on North Street. She rented a cottage next door to the proposed church and felt it would be impossible to rent to white people if a black church was there. She even hired a lawyer, and I have the article here somewhere, but I just find that amusing. Sometimes we can be our own worst enemies. Now this is St. John's. If you guys are from Salina, you remember it's over there by Dairy Queen on 9th Street and ended up burning down. And these are the church members. Don't you love the outfits from back then? And then this is Hawthorne Grade School. I know it's blurry and everything like that, but what I wanted to show you is that during the 1916 and 1920, blacks and whites went to school together. So you can't see because it's a black and white photo, but there are like little white kids with the black kids, and they did that in grade school. And I didn't realize that until I was at the Smoky Hill Museum one day, and I was looking at some stuff, and there was a picture of Hawthorne, and there was a little black girl in there. And I was like, I thought, segregation and everything like that. So then I looked it up to find out that, yeah, in grade school, black and white kids went to school together, at least in Salina. And so segregation laws in Kansas dealt primarily with education, and the state legislature in 1876 enacted a civil rights law that prohibited racial discrimination in any state, university, college, or other school or public instruction, or in any place of public accommodation or amusement or public conveyance. This was in 1876. So it's like, well, what happened? Sounds like we're on the right track, right? Well, in 1879, after a wave of 8,000 African Americans from southern states moved to Kansas, the Kansas legislature enacted a law giving first-class cities, and that's when I say first-class, a city of 15,000 or more, people the authority to establish segregated elementary and junior high schools, specified separate African American schools, and this practice lasted until 1954. Hence the Topeka versus Board of Education, or Brown versus Board of Education. And then the black children went to Dunbar School, which is where St. Francis is now. So this is the school. And this is a classroom. And I remember showing this to some of the elders at the church, and they were like pointing out people that they knew from the pictures. But that's Mr. Caldwell right up there in that corner, and he was a teacher and he was a principal there. And it was established in 1922 by the Salina Board of Education as a modern facility which served black children from kindergarten through 8th grade. And so the high school, the black kids actually went to Central High School. The difference is that the black kids had to sit in the back of the classroom. When they took yearbook photos, they weren't with the other kids. So you know how they have the kids and your name, your last name, and everything like that? They had a totally separate page for the black kids. The segregated schools gave black teachers the opportunity to work. During segregation, black teachers were only hired to teach in black schools. And a lot of time, the African American teachers were more educated than our white counterparts, because a lot of them had like master's degrees and stuff, but they could really only teach. And so when schools desegregated, the white and black kids could go to school together, but they didn't transfer over to the black teachers. So like when you look now, we don't have very many black teachers anymore, but there used to be a lot of black teachers. We just don't have them anymore. So the school, this is Dunbar, opened with teachers, with 6 black teachers and a principal. And the high school in Salina remained integrated as completion of Dunbar marked that advent of segregation in early education levels. Recognized for creative musical events, Dunbar students and faculty inspired and supported cultural development in the community. And then, of course, Dunbar's enrollment declined once segregation ended, and the school closed in 1956. And I want to show you something here. Now this is night, and you can't really see it, but he was the first African American to play on a high school white team in Salina, Kansas. So we have a lot of firsts here. And anyway, they said that the other teammates didn't have an issue with him. It was when they went to other towns. That's where the issues came up. But anyway, you can't. There he is right there, the second from the left in the back row. And there were a lot of social clubs. So this is the 1940s. They had like the USO, they had the Cheerio Club, which is where everybody got real dressed up, real fancy and stuff in their best, and they would go to dances and have their best hats on. And this is a Carver Center where basically they would go to congregate, and they did everything there. That was the center point of life. So you can see some of these, and you see the hats and everything. We still love our hats. And you pretty much looking, because Salina has about 3%, and at this time 3% African American population. So you're pretty much looking at the whole population in that picture. Because at the time, like now we have like what, 47,000 people. We still have a 3% African American population. So it was the community was much smaller then. USO, of course. They're dressed in their best. The kids. And I have to tell you, one of the stories someone told me was Mr. Caldwell, because he was a principal and he was a teacher, and if a kid was acting up, he would go to their house. And the thing, I don't know, is there anybody here that knew Robert Caldwell? You knew, now did he had a soft voice, but he carried a big stick? Yeah? That's what I heard from everybody. I never got the chance to meet him. And actually, this is Robert Caldwell, and he taught hundreds of kids to swim at the Carver swimming pool. Now, you guys, if you're from Salina, you know the Carver swimming pool. That was basically where you could go swimming for free. So you had the municipal pool, which is where that expensive pool is now that nobody can afford to swim. Wasn't that expensive, but the Carver swimming pool, that's where everybody, and he taught a lot of people how to swim. Robert Caldwell did a lot of stuff in this community. So let's see here. We also had an all-black basketball team and football team. And this is Mr. Caldwell. He's a Boy Scout leader. And you see how he integrated black and white kids together. And I have to say, I've had people, come to me and say, what can we do to help? What can we do to help the black community? What can we do? Biggest thing is just to be an ally. It's just to be an ally and just to be aware. And when someone says something out of line, call them on it. Just don't, yeah, that's just how they are. No, that's offensive, and I don't appreciate you saying that. It's just simple like that. I always tell people, when I was growing up, I went to a lot of my friends' homes to eat dinner. They were always white. But how many white kids go to black homes to eat dinner? How many of them talk about the traditions? Why do black people like greens? Why do they eat pickled pig's feet? What's the whole, which is basically scraps. We learned what we could do with scraps. And chitlins, don't ever eat chitlins. You're a young man, don't ever. And then I looked up about swimming pools, because when I first did my presentation, there was like a rash of issues with swimming pools, like black kids going to swimming pools and police being called and all kinds of stuff. So I looked up to see what's the deal with that. And it seems that there's a history of discrimination when it comes to swimming pools. And to quote historian Jeff Wiltz, there's a social intimacy to pool use. People spend hours at the pool, they socialize, chat, and flirt. For all these reasons, historically, Americans have been very protective of the kind of social use of the pools, who allows to use them, who's not allowed, and fear of contamination. And this is what happened in Salina. Salina had a watering hole. And so the black and the Mexican kids would go over there and swim, but they kept having the police called on them because some people didn't, they could still see them. So the police would come and they'd move them back and move them back and move them back. And at that time we had the Oakdale swimming pool, which is at Oakdale Park. And so the African Americans, this is the 1930s, the African Americans petitioned the city of Salina for the use of the swimming pool. And they said no, because it would cost too much to drain a pool. So basically what happened is African Americans would swim. If they swam in a pool, the pool had to be drained so then the white kids could swim. So it cost $50, I think it was, to drain the pool. And so then they came down, they said they could do it once a month, so the black kids could swim. So until Carver swimming pool, that was it. And there's a big long article about it. And so the Oakdale Pond, which is what it was called, was built in the 1920s. And they ended up, they started off swimming once a month, then they got to twice a month. Told you that part. And I'm going to talk about Mr. Robert Caldwell. Now, he taught 7th and 8th grade at Dunbar and also served as the school's principal until it closed in 1956. He was a member of the Allen Chapel AME Church. You guys know where that's at. It's that little church on, I think it's on Ash Street. It's a little small church. And a scoutmaster for Boy Scout Troop 8, based out of St. John's Baptist Church. He was also an active member of the NAACP, which was founded July 13, 1931, and they held their meetings here at the Art Center. Became a Human Relations Commissioner, and he advocated for fair housing, which was passed by the city of Salina. We're unique in that. That was not passed in most cities in Kansas. It made it illegal for anyone to discriminate in the purchase or rental of housing inside the Salina city limits. Was one of the 3 first such bills passed in the state of Kansas. He also pushed and got a bill that monitored and outlawed discrimination in employment. Both bills are still the law in Salina and monitored by the Salina Human Relations Commission. In 1969, Mr. Caldwell won his first race and served as mayor, beginning in 1970. That's the same year that Mr. Woodward was elected as mayor of Wichita. Both men broke the color barrier as being the first African-American mayors to serve in Kansas. He also served 1 term in the Kansas legislature, representing the 68th House District, and he was also hired as the first black teacher in Salina at Central High. And he was hired, it was like in the 60s, so there were no black teachers until like the 1960s, and he taught industrial art. Industrial art. I didn't even, and what was very unique is, like I said before, that there's just a 3% black population. So when he ran for office, he had to have the white vote. So his wife was a teacher, she was a dance instructor at Marymount College. So he had it in with the Catholic Church. So he had nuns knocking on doors, he had students and their parents knocking on doors, he had church people knocking on doors, and he was elected. I'm very proud of that, because at that time there was only 1% African American mayors in the United States. And this is Robert Caldwell Center. A lot of people know, even African Americans don't know that that's why it's Robert Caldwell Center. That's Robert Caldwell. And I'd like to close, and thank you guys so much for being so patient. I know it's, lasted a little long. But in conclusion, why is history important? And it's important because Black history studies the legacies of the past in the present. It studies the past. Studying the past is essential for rooting people in time. And basically knowing your history is important because you don't know where you're going until you know where you've gone. And that's the sad thing, and I have to tell you, my aunt and uncle are here from Idaho, but they taught for years in Alaska, and I lived with them in Alaska. And I was back in 1989 or whatever. And the great thing about them is they had a library. And they had all kinds of Alex Haley, Malcolm X, who my aunt wrote papers on when she was in college, and I won't say what year, but I think the Beatles were still together. But and anyway, but they had a Black history textbook, and I read it, and that was the first time that I actually read my history. The first time, it's all the accomplishments. It's nothing like seeing Black people, and they've accomplished things, and it's like I can accomplish things too. And you know, it's nothing like going to school or whatever, not seeing somebody that looks like you. But anyway, that is my conclusion. Thank you so much for being patient with me. Thank you so much for coming.
We have been able to bring residents and residents to the Art Center. One of the artists involved is Tanika Johnson, and she is a Chicago artist, and her project was the Folded Mat Project. She took North and South Chicago, folded it in half, and found these map twins, getting people from North addresses and South addresses together to see what was different about their communities. How did they navigate their communities? What were amenities in their communities? And what was happening and how they interacted with their neighbors in that community. So we are attempting to replicate that project with Tanika, with Salina. So I want to encourage you to take some time and think about how we interact with Salina today. So we have map pins and a list of questions on the wall, and we'd like you to pin your home with your color. We'd also like you to answer any of the questions, but we want to see sort of what are some of the challenges. And if you take time to watch Tanika's video that she's created when she's interviewing these map pins, a lot of questions come out about things like, where is your nearest grocery store? And so that has, spurred questions within, sort of Art Center patrons as we're talking about Tanika's work, and when we have her film discussion, would we be able to buy an organic apple north of Iron Street in Salina? Would we find an ATM machine, and if we did, where is it? So questions about, literally how do we interact and navigate our own community? And when this project first came to us, I am the first one to say, I thought, oh, well, it's Salina. Salina's small. Of course, we get around and we know where everything is, and everybody is getting along, and no, there's no place I haven't been. And but as we have really dug into these discussions, I realized there's a whole lot about Salina that I do not know and did not understand. So I encourage you to take some time and interact with the map. Please visit Residents and Dissonance and Resonance. I say it backward every time. Was there any questions or any thoughts that came from Marie's discussion?
I'm very interested in just your research practice, because you saying that so many of the records were not available. How did you end up ferreting out the information that you did?
I talked to a lot of elders, and in fact, there's some that have relocated, like this one gal, Phyllis Jackson, that's in Topeka. She actually had to get out a magnifying glass when she was pulling up some of her information that she kept, because she couldn't see, she was so old. But I had to go to the elders to find information and find pictures and stuff. And one of the elders that I went to is Mrs. Barbara Nye. Some of you may know her. She keeps records on St. John's Church, St. John Missionary Baptist Church. So she's got this huge book on all the stuff that went on at St. John's Baptist Church, the history of it. So I was able to gather information from her, and then newspaper articles. And then the word is, I was able to get a hold of a couple of the little pamphlets and newsletters.
And I came in late, and I apologize for that, but I did hear you refer to the word is.
Yeah.
What is that?
It was like a black newsletter.
Okay.
And it let the people in the community know basically what was going on, and like the dances and stuff, and
Okay.
just comings and goings and stuff like that, because none of that was in the newspaper for blacks, to gather.
And was it just, I don't know, on demand, so to speak, or when there was
It was
something?
like every 3 months, and it was like a little booklet.
Uh-huh.
And then I got a hold of the anniversary edition, And that's where I was able to get some of those black and white pictures that didn't come out very good at all. That was the best, you know.
When did it, do you have any idea what time frame it operated in?
I honestly don't remember, but I'll find that out. I should know that. I'll find that out for you.
Thanks.
Other thoughts or anything you'd like to contribute to the discussion?
Are you doing this all by yourself, or do you have other people involved in this research, and
No, I do this on my own.
it's just a hobby that you just kind of keep
Well,
going?
actually, what happened is,
I mean, I should know on your hand, but
what happened is I wrote my thesis on Robert Caldwell because I didn't know that we had a black mayor, and at that time, that he was the only black mayor that we had. We elected Dr. Davis a few years back as the second black mayor. So anyway, it was like, when the heck did this black guy become mayor of Salina in 1970? You know, just after the civil rights passage, passage of civil rights. So then, after did all that stuff, and I guess my name got around, someone called me and asked me to do one on segregation. And I didn't believe that was a Smoky, I think that was known as from the Smoky museum. And so that's when I started doing this research and finding people and stuff. So I kind of had a foot in from my Robert Caldwell thesis. And so that's what kind of led me to that. And then I got a call one day to talk about urban renewal in Salina. I did research on that, so I know like a little bit, or as much as I could find out. Like I read it about anyway, that's a whole other story. So the people just asked me questions, and then I just researched it.
so this isn't an organized group that
No.
you're working with, it's just you doing this by yourself?
Yeah.
Yes.
I was just gonna say that, Salina has had a lot of firsts, and it's been impressive, but I just heard today that the Human Relations Commission is uninhabited right now. There's no one working at the Human Relations Commission in Salina. And I think that is, and there are other things, I feel like we're going backwards in many ways, and I think we've got a lot of work to do. And just as an aside, I'm glad you're a historian. I wanted to be a history teacher in high school, when I was in high school, but my second thought was I can't coach football.
I never understood that. Like, what?
Sorry, not that.
No, that's, I actually have done both.
Yeah.
But it's my number one peeve. When I was in New Jersey, you have to teach your highest degree, which mine was history, master's in history. Well, then I moved to Alaska, and they hired me to teach science and math because I had a minor in both. I said, no, I have a master's degree in history. They said, well, we saved that for the football coach. I was never so infuriated in my life.
That's why the United States is in the shape.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm
It's like the
saying.
average person doesn't know the three branches of the government, and civics is a new,
And we actually have a senator that doesn't know the three.
several, probably.
Yeah. But,
Yeah, good
but
point.
me and David, we were on the Human Relations Commission some years ago, and we passed a ordinance to allow, so that the LGBTQ community cannot be discriminated in work and employment and housing. And then it went on the ballot, and it was the people of Salina overrode that. So we don't have that ordinance.
Well, I think if anything, I think this is something that we realize there is still a lot of work to do. And I think that it starts by having these conversations and not being afraid to participate in the conversation. And I think we live in a culture right now that sometimes it is a little scary to participate. You don't know if you're going to say the right thing or the wrong thing or offend somebody, or you're not going to have your, well intentions may not translate all the time. So stay in there, stay involved, stay having the conversation, and that is how we will make changes. Jim, did you have a question?
I was told by an African-American woman that grew up here, lived here in Salina for years and years, that the first integrated restaurant was the old bus station. That was where the
Yeah, that's the one I was talking about.
That's
Yeah. And I always wondered, like, did they integrate after they had the whole riot thing? I mean, I don't know what year it integrated.
in living memory.
What's that?
Depends living memory, but I don't know.
Yeah, I know, because that riot occurred in the 40s, but no, it was.
Was that the Casa Bonita? That was one.
Yeah, that was the name of it.
Yeah.
Down there with the bus station and the restaurant.
Yeah, it
Was
was
connected.
integrated when I came here in 1968.
Yeah. Which is sad because we should have more than that just integrated. There are establishments that should have been, they were supposed to be integrated, but they weren't integrated.
So I'll bounce this off of Marie as well. I've been talking recently to Deborah Cox, and you were mentioning Robert Caldwell finally moving south of Crawford. And that had not been permitted before. Deborah tells the story of them being at first in a very large house, relatively large house near the Salvation Army, so that's easy to locate on near Santa Fe. Part of the reason that they had a larger house was that, hey, Mrs. Caldwell taught dance classes. When she wasn't a married man, she taught it at some home. And in those days, many black African American people weren't able to get out of hotels. So they served, if word would get around, they would host people at the house. Then he did try to buy a house south of Crawford and was not allowed to, but he bought, for a while, bought the house. And if you've seen it, you may know about it. If you picture Peerless Tires, 2 blocks to the west of that on Crawford, just on the line, north of Crawford. It's a very nice, still a very nice house there. So he was there for long before he moved, I think, so. So it's an interesting story about our mayor.
And he bought multiple houses and rented homes. And he also had a group, I don't know if you guys know anything about Masons, but it's a black organization of black men. And I don't know if there's one Masons too.
Masons?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we had Masons here, and he had a home that he purchased and allowed him to use the home but at no cost. And so there's lots of memories from those young men from the Masons because it helped raise them up. And back at the time, it's not so much like it isn't like anymore, but the black community was real tight. Now that's back when if you saw somebody else's kid doing something, you'd flip them and then tell them all later. You know, that's probably it.
Just an opinion or not really opinion, it's an acknowledgement that, you know, the closer we are to local discussions and local gatherings like this kind of thing all over the country, that's where the change is going to come from. It needs to come from the bottom up and it's not going to come from the top down, I don't think, easily. But just to know the history of the little place that you walk and talk and live. If somebody like Marie or a little organization or a group of people in every town across America could bring that information and now there's a movement nationally to stop teaching that stuff and to punish people who do teach that stuff. So it's really important that we have to do it in other ways. You know, not only, you got to go around the system sometimes rather than fight the system, although that's a good thing to do too. But anyway, that's just an acknowledgement as an outsider coming in here. I'm like, wow, this